So, good evening, everybody, at COP27, at the last event of today at the German Pavilion here in Sharm El-Sheikh. And warm welcome to our joint event of the Federation of German Industry, BDI, together with Econsens, the Forum of Sustainable Development, and ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce. Today's topic is the role of private actors in just energy transition partnerships, JETPs as we call them. And in fact, I think there couldn't be a better day than today to talk about JETPs. There are news about the second JETP, we'll come to that point, just announced today. But maybe let's start with what are JETPs really all about. It's about just energy transition partnerships, a new format from last year from COP26 in Glasgow. And we'll come to the first example that does exist, that is about to exist in a partnership with South Africa. And we will try to discuss and work out a little bit what are the JETPs about, how are they different, how do they add to the existing instruments and funds. And I'm sure we'll come very close to very interesting points because we have an enormously interesting panel here, an experienced panel from all different sides that you should engage with when you talk about this topic. My name is Carsten Roll, I'm from the Federation of German Industries, and now I'd like to introduce the panel from my right to the left, starting with Birgit Schwenk. Mrs. Schwenk is the Director General for Climate Action in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. We still have to practice the newly formed ministry. Mrs. Schwenk has, I think, a long-standing career in the Ministry of Environmental Affairs, formerly, with many different topics from, we discussed raw material issues and circular economy issues already quite some years ago, I remember. But now, of course, with everything that has to do with climate action, obviously, and leading also these JETPs from governmental side. Next to her, I'd like to welcome Mr. Uwe Leibach. Mr. Lauber is the... that was too fast.
No news.
Too sorry. Mr. Laubach is the CEO of MAN. MAN is a energy solutions, and himself being a mechanical engineer. I think a company quite international, and by that closely involved with partnerships all over the world, and a private partner in these JETPs maybe one day. And we want to figure out what is the role of industry in this game. How could industry make a difference in developing these countries, in also helping them to decarbonize with technology, but also with the standards, labor standards, and other issues that we bring from Europe, from Germany, into these countries. Now, next to Mr. Lauber is Christiane Leibach. She is a member of the executive board of KfW Group since last year, since June 2021. And Mrs. Leibach has a long, extensive experience in development finance as well as corporate finance. And she was playing a key role in creating finance instruments to address climate change and the SDGs in former times. So also from that point of view, with her economic background, I think quite interesting what role do financial institutions play in if it comes to private and public capital that should match in developing the partnerships. Next to Ms. Leibach, I'm happy to have Hakan Gurdal with us. Mr. Gurdal is member of the management board of Heidelberg Materials as of 2016. He as well as, on the one hand side, the responsibility for the African Eastern Mediterranean Basin Group, as well as for the trading business of Heidelberg, and as an engineer with many different stages within his career in different companies. I think he could also, like Mr. Lauber, help us understanding what industry can bring into these partnerships, and maybe also to understand what could be requirements for a just transition that lies into the term. Last but not least, and I think this is really important, not only talking about countries that we want to address, but with them, we do have Mr. Fakir, Salim Fakir here. Mr. Fakir is the Executive Director of the African Climate Foundation. And prior to that, he was also working for the WWF South Africa for a long time, as well as being serving Director for the World Conservation Union in South Africa. So you're really from South Africa and may help us to mirror somehow, are the instruments that we're trying to work out, are they really functioning? Does that resonate in South Africa? Or what could be requirements that you would formulate to make these partnerships really a big success? Now, talking about JETPs, and this is, I think, the first question that goes to you. In defining these, they have, I understood, 3 key elements. That's what all the JETPs have in common. It's about decarbonization and phasing out of coal. It's about bringing private and public money together. And it is about just, whatever just is in definition. And now I'm really interested in how you, as the inventor of the instrument, try to explain us a little bit further what JETPs are really all about. Ms. Schwenk.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be on this distinguished panel. And what day could be the better day, actually, to talk about JETPs than the day that we have the second JETP now committed to in Indonesia at the G20 summit. And we have an investment plan for the first JETP ever, and that's the one in South Africa. And now I must really correct you. I'm certainly not the inventor of the JETPs, but rather I'm happy to profit from works of others, and I'm very happy to be able to work with the partner countries in the framework of the JETPs. What are JETPs all about? JETPs are about dealing with the gaps that we have in international climate action, and that's an implementation gap and a financing gap. So if we want to reach 1.5 degrees, achieving an energy transition, and that very, very fast, shifting away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, to energy efficiency, phasing out coal, that is really the order of the day. But in developing countries and in emerging economies, it is a lot harder to get to grips with that and to find the investment needed to achieve that energy transition. The IEA has actually calculated that the amount of money, the amount of funding that goes annually into clean energy in developing countries and emerging economies has stayed flat since Paris. So nothing much has happened here in terms of financing for the energy transition. This is what we really need to get to a trajectory of 1.5 degrees. So what we're doing in the JETPs is that, first of all, we are getting several donors together, several partners together to work with one country. We are going away from sort of a piecemeal, project-by-project approach, but rather pooling the finance, allowing a much larger and therefore much more effective partnership. And we are concentrating on the energy transition, and the partner countries are making commitments for this energy transition. Like, as we've seen with South Africa, a lot of focus is on the coal phase-out. With Indonesia now, the Indonesians have made incredibly ambitious commitments in the course of this Just Energy Transition Partnerships, which will bring forward the peak in emissions in the power sector by 7 years. They have committed now, the Indonesian government, to reach net zero in the power sector by 2050. They have committed to very stringent goals for the development of the power sector to 2030, raising the share of renewable energies to 34% by 2030, whereas business as usual would have been about half as much. So we really see that, there are very substantial commitments being made here, and commitments where the Indonesian government has the ownership. They're freezing the pipeline for new coal power plants, so no more expanding the capacity of new coal-fired generation. So really a game changer in that very large region, very large country, very influential in the region. And so a wonderful development, I think, here. And partner countries are going to invest 10 billion in that JETP and also have promised to mobilize another 10 billion from the private sector. And that's what we're here for. Private sector engagement is also what is needed for the energy transition in those partner countries.
Thank you so much. And as you said, it's more not about singular projects. It's about really a more systemic approach, asking for a commitment of countries, of governments, as well as of other players and stakeholders, and by that making a difference to all the different schemes that do exist on financing singular projects. This would be the approach in really achieving a longer-term perspective. Now, long-term perspectives are also part of planning in industry, obviously. I mean, energy transition, doing research, development, bringing new products on the table, including green hydrogen, including all of what the energy transformation is about, is also part of your daily business. And when it comes to the maritime sector, you're also connecting maybe not countries, not governments, but countries with the technologies MAN is producing. Maybe just a few words on your role in these partnerships, Mr. Lauber.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much that I have the chance here to be on stage with you to talk about the JETPs, because I think this is a great tool which you have invented, I say it now, and of course you need different. You need to see different angles on it, and we as a mechanical engineering company. Since a long time, we have it's in our tradition to do partnerships, to do agreements with different countries. And one you have mentioned before, it's the maritime business. Maritime business is a global, it's an international business, and that helps us also to understand the needs of the different societies, the different organizations, the different regions, areas of the world. So having said that, I mean, being responsible for MAN Energy Solutions, we have, and these are really good news, we as the German company, we have the technology, and this is great news. And this technology, of course, is not only available for Europe, we need to roll it out. We need to roll it out to countries where we need to make business. And you mentioned one specific topic is hydrogen. Whether we like it or not, we heavily will depend also in the future of, let's say, importing energy. And once it comes to green hydrogen, of course, we need to cooperate with countries which are located in the Sun Belt, because this is there where we can produce energy with a decent amount of money, let's say 1 or 2 cents the kilowatt hour, and the technology comes from us. So partnership is a key topic. Now, the second topic, which is also very important in this area of the world, is we need to approach them in a different way. So countries like Chile, like the Middle East area, the Sun Belt, they are all different. And you need to understand also the culture from the cultural perspective. For us as MAN Energy Solution, it is really important that we have a kind of a level playing field. We need to treat these countries at the same level, and we don't want to create a second Commonwealth. That's not our intention. Hand in hand, we want to collaborate and make this climate change to a success.
Absolutely, and that's of course a sensitive issue. I mean, we ask for commitment, but we are not really colonizing or Commonwealth-style approach of really telling what to do, but really more assisting and supporting on a road that these countries should define themselves with the technologies that we can offer, but also with additional funds, with additional money. And with that, obviously, we come closer to Ms. Leiber. Private money, public money, jointly bound together with a longer-term perspective, but also with requirements, of course, these countries have to meet. And How do you look? What is the role of KfW? I mean, you're all over the world in almost every country, I think. With all the knowledge of these countries, how do you look on this instrument?
Yeah, first, thanks a lot for inviting me here tonight. I think it's a very, very relevant topic at this very point in time and for the future. Yeah, our role is obviously, as you said, I mean, we have cooperation with a lot of countries and over long years. And when we're talking about JETP, and I think that shows the two first countries which are set up on the agenda, is really to work with countries which are more emerging countries, which are large countries, which have a large footprint on CO2, and to work with them together and to find ways and means to really decarbonize their industries, in particular their power generation. And I think there were two things already mentioned which is important in the work we are doing. That the one is the systematic approach, and the other one is what a role can we play with these governments which have already a lot of experience themselves in these sectors, in their governing, in their regulations, and so on and so forth. And what we use usually now, and what we deploy, what we discuss with the governments, is really structural and policy changes to regulate energy and power sectors in a better way, and to define with our international partners we work with, that has been mentioned already as well, with other development banks, with multilateral banks, policy frameworks which we agree upon with the government of the countries, support them in finding good ways here to regulate the sector, and for that set out policy-based loans which can be used then for all means in the energy and in the power sector. Why is that so important? We think that when we come away from financing on a project-by-project basis, which a lot of countries like Indonesia and South Africa can do themselves nowadays, it is more about changing the environment, a systematic approach for the specific target really to attract more private capital. Because what we all know is as many government funds we can put up in developing countries or ourselves from the more advanced countries, it won't never be enough really to decarbonize industry, to decarbonize a society. So what we really need is more private capital, but private capital is a shy animal. Private capital loves stability, loves transparency, loves very good regulations and clear regulations. So you will only be able to attract private capital if a sector, if an energy sector, if a power sector is set up in that way. And that is our main target under JETP, plus obviously the social side, which is of a lot of importance too, because if a country decarbonizes, we know that from our own history, there is might be very stressful times for those people that lose their jobs, and if you don't have something else to offer for them, I think it will get a lot of pressure, political pressure in countries, if that is not played out at the same time.
Well, thank you so much, and we'll come back to that, I think, on how the different revenue streams or the financing schemes may make a difference from other projects that are purely publicly financed when it comes to discovering the needs of the country and of the consumers there. Maybe in this mixture we are closer to market and closer to the needs that are explained by those that should make use of it. Mr. Goda, now we turn to an energy-intensive product, obviously, cement.
Yeah.
Everywhere, all over the world with urbanization. But still, I think you're working also on many ways of decarbonizing cement globally, and also assisting, I think, in combining different materials, countries that still have to develop and want to develop on the way, with lower and less carbon. What is your view on a partnership? What could be industry role in a country like South Africa for Heidelberg?
Thank you so much. For us, it is clear to mention, probably we are the biggest German company investing in Africa. In more than 15 countries, we have locations more than 40 years, and having strong positions, including Congo, Togo, Liberia, Tanzania, South Africa, all over these regions. I would like to put a critical point, because CO2 roadmap is a critical target at country level, including Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, including emerging countries for us. So we know our roadmap and we know where we are going. We have the most ambitious target to reach below 400 kilogram per ton, which is the most ambitious target in the industry. How to reach it? There are already proven positions. First of all, in the energy transition is a good point. If in Europe and in many mature countries we can replace coal 100% with alternative fuel, why can't we do it in Africa? Is there an issue of availability of waste in Africa? There is not. Is there an issue of a commitment? There is not. Is there an issue of an investment or the funding? There is not. The main point is the clear regulation and the follow-up of the regulation. I mean, one side is the regulation, but follow-up of regulation in developing markets. Very clear. A good example, in Egypt now we are moving the biggest wasted power generation we are now building in Egypt now, 20 megawatt. It's just using the waste heat of our process and creating 20 megawatts, which is close to 1/3 of our total needs. And also on the product, there are so many additional points to be done, because for 1 ton of cement, you may use down to 30% clinker or up to 95% clinker. And how you make these differences? By adding the cementitious materials. And now, I'm proudly to say, also we are now investing in Ghana for the biggest calcined clay project, which is by nature, as in Ghana, a good example, limestone is not available. Clinker is being imported by ships coming from Mediterranean or from other locations. But what we are aiming is to reduce the clinker incorporation ratio and to reach to these sustainability targets without any additional funds, without any additional needs. But what we need is regulation and fair competition. While doing so, we do not have any ETS support in emerging markets. We do not have any type of incentives in emerging markets. We do it because we believe we have no time to lose. And we are moving to this direction, but to be honest, in Africa, what is the real, let's say, perspective of a, let's say, energy-intensive industry portfolio? This is a bit a critical topic. So my point is, we believe in emerging markets, and we would like to grow in a sustainable manner and to reach the global targets and achievements as we are doing in mature markets.
Thank you so much. Now, that was 4 times a more German perspective. And now we are, of course, most curious to see how does that resonate in South Africa. I mean, South Africa, the role model for the JETPs, so to speak, just announced its investment plan. So you're about to really practice and implement the whole thing. What's your view? Did the JETPs really make the difference, and to what extent are these requirements that are connected to that are perceived? Is that a touchy issue? Is that something that is part of a political debate, or is that really assisting and helping you?
Thank you very much. And my father used to run a printing machine which was using Heidelberg. So it's very nice to meet a company that has been around, I think, for 100 years maybe.
Yeah, more than
I think maybe just to say that it would be not very accurate to think of JETPs as separate from a bigger picture in South Africa. And the reason why I say that is that we have very high unemployment. We have a high debt to GDP ratio. And there's been a decline in investment in infrastructure. You would know that, I'm sure you do a lot of analysis on this. So there's a number of converging issues that have come together. And then, of course, we have extremely high dependence on coal, which is not sustainable in the long term. And if you have the EU pass the carbon border tax adjustments, South Africa's economy is going to be extremely affected by that in all the sectors: cement, steel, automobile industry. You're going to ban ICE, internal combustion engines very soon. And then we have a gap in investment in generation capacity. So that context is very important because it's not just a climate deal. Of course, the climate deal is an opportunity for us to be able to put an ambition, a climate ambition, exploit the Article 9 provisions in the Paris process, which says that South Africa can fast-track the ambition to meet a new emissions target, but will require assistance. So if you look at the broader strategy, it is around an economic recovery plan. We, I think, successfully used a NDC approach, a model, to access cheaper sources of finance and move it in an area where we have to invest in, which is cleaner sources of energy. I think it's, if you may, very shrewd to do that. And that's the reason why it is catching fire everywhere, the idea of a JETP. I've been very actively involved as the foundation, African Climate Foundation. We have been supporting JETP, the JETP in South Africa for the last 2 years. But it's allowing many emerging economies to think about this ability to use the climate agenda to drive new infrastructure investment and effectively to try to encapsulate that in an investment plan, which was concluded year before COP. We have access to 8.5 billion, fairly concessional, better than one can assume that the government can raise on an open bond market. We have a gap of, the total first phase package is 90 billion. So the 8.5 billion is a small part of a larger investment drive. We will put out a study in next week or so showing that the other sources of finance can be mobilized from the South African financial sector. We managed to do that, by the way, before. 19 billion, many German companies have been invested in that, Siemens and etc., in the renewables program before the JETP. So it's not something we're not familiar with, but what's more important is that if we can scale up renewables, it enables more investments in electric vehicles. There's already interest in South Africa to scale up investments of up to 250 billion in hydrogen, green hydrogen. So I think we must see this as part of a way to create investment momentum to fast track it in clean energy, to be able to exploit the benefit of having low-cost technologies available in the global market that is competitive, much more competitive than coal at present.
But thank you. But discovering the success factors of the model, I mean, there have been basically at least two barriers to overcome. One was the strong market role of Eskom using coal in the market, electricity market. And the second one you mentioned, 1/3 unemployment, 90,000 people working in the mining sector. This is socially, of course, a challenge. Now with the just energy transition partnerships, what was the just element? I mean, what do you do with these workers? Are there programs? How could you really raise acceptance?
So you have to think of the problem at three levels. The first is you got to look at unemployment across the country in many different sectors. The way to hopefully deal with that is to create the right levels of economic growth, that you can have more employment in different sectors. Then there's a specific focus on displacement of coal. But we know that if you displace it with renewables, it's not necessarily true that a job generated in the renewable sector is necessarily going to replace the coal job. So there's
Capital intensive.
a friction around that. So we have to find other ways of doing that. But I do think that the way to deal with that is to have a different economic model for the coal mining areas that encourages other investments, which if we had coal crowded out, by the way, because it's a dirty industry, it effectively displaced opportunities in other investments. So we can revitalize areas by looking at alternative industries in there. And I think the third thing is that by making investment, you have a stimulus effect. You create jobs not only directly through the infrastructure program, but also by increasing the spend in the economy. All economists know that. You have multiplier effects. You create other interlinkages with other sectors. You create jobs in other sectors. So I think you've got to see this as part of an economic strategy to stimulate growth in the right way with the right type of finance, because the challenge we have is every country will have, as you know, including Italy, is that if your growth rate is lower than the cost of your interest rate, then you're going to have a problem.
A problem, yeah.
So,
okay. Ms. Lauber, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear what you are saying, because it's not only about technology itself. These are new type of technologies which also causes some sort of headaches here in Germany. Hydrogen, CCS or CCUS products, and all of these fancy products in order to decarbonize the different processes. So for me, and that is our task to do, is it's not mandatory that we deliver the right technology, install it, but we need to do also some sort of training. Train the people. So for instance, we have these days all around the globe around about 14 training centers. This is not enough, I know that, but it's a first attempt to train the people, to give them confidence to work with these new type of fuels, like dealing with hydrogen, like dealing with ammonia, like dealing with e-fuels. And that's not an easy thing. That takes some time. That's why I said it's a partnership approach. We cannot think as an industry leader, we just go there, sell our equipment, and then run away, and then it's done. Long-term service agreement, 20 years or even longer. We are there to serve the country, to help the country, to give them some sort of guidance. As long as they need us, we are happy to share our technology, to share our know-how, but also show them the way how to optimize these plants.
So training is part of that. Another one would be maybe labor standards. The Western companies think of standards. Usually Western companies, if they locate in developing countries, really change something also in the expectations of human workforce. Mm-hmm. Is that something would you also see as a success factor in a partnership, talking about just partnerships?
Absolutely. The partnership point needs to have a very strong presence at local level. And in our business as well, what we are facing is to get the right level of, let's say, long-term and long-lasting relationships, including a piece of the government side as well, because this waste handling is including also the government side. And on the government side, we need long-term concessions to create the waste platforms that we could create to replace coal. Yeah. That happened in Europe, and for this to happen as well in Africa, now we are implementing, let's say, our initiatives. In Congo, elephant grass. In Togo, we have different cashew nuts and everything that we could have biomasses to use. But on the developed side of the countries, what we see, technology is there. Technology is not the issue. We can already move it. But what I am realizing more and more, especially in Africa, in some parts of Asia even, let's say, major companies are looking at the short-term, let's say, returns, may leave these countries. And now, who is replacing those operators in these countries from the compliance point of view, from the also, let's say, conservative approach point of view, how they are treating also human resources as well, is a topic to be addressed.
Absolutely. Ms. Frank, now that was the first one. We just said initially that Indonesia is now to follow. That was one of the successes of today as the second JETP, and there are others in preparation, India, Senegal, Vietnam. Are they all very different? I mean, we've talked about the three elements, but how do they react if they're confronted with the requirements, expectations that are linked to the donation of these funds? Could you give us an insight on how these talks or negotiations actually do work?
Would you mind if I actually comment on the subject before a little, on the question of what is just and how can we actually exchange on that? I'll come back to your question if you don't mind, because this is actually a very important subject and a very important part of the partnership, because it can only be successful if actually also the population has a feeling that they gain something out of it. And so the JETPs are about the energy transition, yes, and about climate action, but they're also about creating livelihoods, about creating jobs that have a much better future than jobs in the fossils sector. So by now it's clear that actually a job in, say, renewables or in a decarbonizing industry is a lot more reliable, but still for the people who have jobs in the fossil sector, it might not feel like that at all. So there is friction. And we in Germany have quite a bit of experience with dealing a structural change in our coal mining region. And so involving all stakeholders is essential. Helping with capacity building, with training, in those regions to build up new industries. We've tried to do that in Germany now, actually, with developing some of these formerly coal mining regions into model regions for the energy transition. So this is also something that I wanted to stress, that this is, of course, about the energy transition, but it's also very much about welfare and creating livelihoods that will actually have a good future. So, turning back to your question, what about other countries with which we're talking about just energy transition partnerships? These talks are at very, very different stages. You were asking whether they were all the same or not. Well, there is definitely no one-size-fits-all, because this is a partnership. Of course, so it will have to be geared towards the needs and the plans and the own policies, the demands of each country. So this is not like we have a fact sheet, this is how a JETP is built, but rather these are conversations with the countries that are intensive, that take a bit of time. And that might lead to different outcomes, different commitments. There are different sectors that are necessary. So we are in consultations with Vietnam, with India, and we're making good progress. But the JETPs will end up looking different.
And they're an instrument.
And that's good.
Right. And an instrument not for every country in the world. That's not possible. But it's an instrument really addressing bigger countries, bigger emitters that have to overcome and coal phase out, or at least want to speed up their coal phase out. This is still, I think, one of the key elements in the DNA of a JETP, right?
Well, but we shouldn't forget that we have other long-standing instruments to work with partner countries. So we have a lot of bilateral cooperation instruments. We have energy partnerships, and we have the International Climate Initiative that I'm responsible for. So it's not like a country has to have a JETP to be able to get support and a good partnership and financial help. and support if they want to go forward with an energy transition. So I think this is something that also has to be said every now and then. It's not just a JETP or you're out.
Now, Ms. Leibach, you're well experienced with all the project financing, but this is, as you said, different. We are talking about a systemic approach, about different criteria that is also that have to be checked. Just imagine how a bank would check justice or justability criteria in giving loans to a country. What does that do with all the governance of your business in checking criteria, in really doing the job a bank does usually with a completely, or at least a lot more political approach in this sense? Is that challenging? Is that doable now with the first month of experience?
Yeah, certainly it is. I mean, it's a very different instrument. So you don't get into projects and analyze them and monitor them on a project-by-project basis. You are more in the context of a policy dialogue and about what is already implemented in terms of reforms. And obviously there are means to do that. Yeah? And I think besides that, there is a systematic approach. I think what is really important to note is that this gets us all, in particular the government from Germany, but other government and us as implementing agencies, and with the countries, I think, on a very different level of cooperation and coordination. And I think that in itself is very, very important because that's, I think, how it should be built up. So I think we're working very differently there. But just to add a couple of words on other parts of the program, I think certainly sector reforms and policy-based laws is one, but I think there are still means to finance project by projects in different ways. And what I think is in particular true for the larger economies, for the emerging countries, and South Africa is a good example, and Indonesia is a good example. I think these are all countries where the mixture of development loans and market-driven loans and private sector and even financings from the banking market are all happening at the same time. So we are definitely not more at a stage where a country has only to rely on development loans. Depending on what the project is, what the program is, what the sector is, there is access to private markets as well. But still, I think the function of a JETP is to give really a very positive signal to the capital markets as well, and to allow like countries in Indonesia and South Africa really to show a better profile to the international markets. And I think that in itself is very, very important, because that's what the countries are able to do, because you mentioned it earlier, I think South Africa has had a very successful program of independent power producing in wind a few years ago. For some political reason that was stopped. We don't want to talk about that anymore. But it's not the way that you cannot build with South Africa and Indonesia as the same on a lot of experience and have a dialogue which is really oriented on the future and decarbonization and what it means for all of us and the people in your countries. Yeah.
As I know that Mr. Faki has to leave a little bit earlier, maybe before I open the floor to your questions, if you would have the chance to give recommendations to India, to Vietnam, to the other partnering countries, what are the learnings 1 year after announcing the JETP? I mean, there have been probably some traps others shouldn't really go into. Some other learnings you'd like to share with us?
I think dinosaurs did become extinct. So what we have to have is a very clear view about where the world is moving in terms of a new technological modernization. And I do think they will disrupt the current model, particularly in the electricity sector. So I think countries should utilize the ability to, if you want, displace their coal for a climate finance deal, do it earlier rather than later, and capitalize on the opportunity to integrate new technology, new forms of industrial capability. Otherwise, there could be other countries that would lead that road. I just want to say one more thing around policy-based lending. I know it's a prominent theme in the discussion. What we have to be careful with is that the agreements on concessional finance have to integrate with the existing policy reforms in order to make policy-based lending an acceptable and legitimate part of the agreement of the concessional. What will happen if you have policy-based lending coming before the reform agenda within a country? It will be seen as a way in which these deals are an attempt to influence the outcomes, and they have to be rather politically first accepted. The reforms need to be mandated by the host country that is willing to embark on this, and your concessional finance must take the lead from the owners of these JETPs, not the other way around. And I'm pretty sure you're aware of this debate and the perception that it's climate finance is used to influence reforms at a pace that the country itself is not willing to go.
Absolutely. Start as an open process. I know that many of us in industrialized countries believe from themselves that they already know the solution. But I think working on these solutions must be really a crucial part of an element of these partnerships and discovering these potentials together rather than really educating them somehow. Now it's time for you to raise your questions. I'm sure you will, as there's so many experts in front of you, might be able to answer or at least comment on your questions. If so, yeah, there is one on the green sofa.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to follow up on what you previously have mentioned, that it's like not educating others. So my question is, what can you learn from the JETPs from the countries that you are like not sponsoring but supporting, and that when it comes to the own phasing out of coal in Germany?
And the question is directed to
whoever feels comfortable.
Whoever feels comfortable.
I'm afraid I didn't really get the full question.
I understood. What can we learn?
Yes, what can you learn from the JETPs for the phasing out of coal in Germany?
Ah, this way around.
Well, it is interesting to exchange with another country on the process because some of the problems are the same. And as I said, that question of how do you actually develop economic opportunities for the regions which so far are coal mining, I think that's sort of the same problem that we're having. You can exchange on the process of how to get ownership. You can exchange on, say, legislatory requirements, and then in a way you can also start forming a group of countries that are going through that process that can show how it's being done under very different circumstances. So in a way you gain a momentum by coming together as a larger number of countries going through the coal phase-out, because there is, of course, concern in many countries. What would that do to my economy? How will I deal with the frictions that ensue if some jobs are being lost? And it's very important to show that that countries from very different regions and with very economic preconditions, and that countries that rely heavily on coal in their energy mix, South Africa, Germany, Indonesia, the like, that they can do it.
And I guess you're also a bit alluding to, well, at least the Coal Commission and the Coal Compromise in Germany, while bringing a lot of money in cushioning some of the social effects in Eastern Germany, in those regions where coal-fired power plants did play a major role. And of course, well, the money we're talking about here is probably not exactly the same that we were investing in Germany. So the relations are, the idea is similar, maybe the amounts are different. But we are talking, in fact, about combining transformational aspiration with ways and means to really raise acceptance. And that's the idea, I think, of both. Huh?
Well, I mean, we have to, and that is an integral part of the JETP as well, we have to mobilize private finance. Whereas, for instance, in the case of South Africa, 8.5 billion have already been mobilized, and now it's really the time for the private sector and the financial flows to come in.
Like to comment, Ms. Leibach? Or?
No. I mean that's definitely the target. It's the target from South Africa to make that happen, and there again, I think it's not the way that South Africa doesn't have any experience that it has a very good and deep banking market, even for long-term financing. So this can be tapped. It doesn't even have to be an external financing. I think it is. I interpret is the way more the signal. This is really now serious about changing the sector, about being transparent, about having rules and regulations for like an energy sector, and then I think there's going to happen a lot from South Africa own means as well. Yeah. Right. And I think Indonesia will be very similar to that. Yeah.
Huge potential. There's another question on the very right.
Thank you. My name is Sangeet. I'm a researcher at the Deutsche Institut für Wirtschaftsforschung in Berlin. My question's on cost of capital, actually. I mean, now that we're talking about mobilizing private capital for the JETPs, I think we've not really addressed cost of capital as an issue. I think in South Africa, it's not so much of an issue. As you said, there's a very robust market, but for the JETPs and the other countries that are coming on, I think there are instruments like MIGA and other that are working, and I'm curious about KfW and maybe also to hear from the industries here. What more can they do to reduce cost of capital? What can they do for insurance guarantees? What kind of new instruments do we need for that to get private capital into the JETPs?
Maybe I can link your question with another one on the regulatory framework that is needed for investment, and that would also be a question, I think, for the two industry panelists here. If you look on South Africa or Indonesia, we talked about already financing different schemes, but also on other regulatory frameworks that is probably needed to make these investments really happen. What do you see there? What are the requirements that you like to mention also in front of government?
Maybe I can start first. And I mean, sometimes I'm thinking about doing business even more or better in a more proper way in South Africa or in these countries which we are talking than in Germany itself. Because the frameworks we have in Germany is we are making or trying to make business on a PowerPoint basis than to implement the power plants. We are good to make some plans, but once it comes to execution, we are stuck. I mean, building up hydrogen plants in Germany is a nightmare. It's a disaster. I clearly can address that. To get the permission to ramp up a plant in the northern part of Germany, this is our particular case, because we have an own hydrogen electrolyzer producer. It's a nightmare. You don't get the permission in a decent time window. 9 to 12 months and the permission still is not there. And this is not the only example I can tell you in Germany. The money is there, but the boundaries are somewhere not given to ramp up new fuels, new type of energy sources. It is not there. South Africa, Indonesia, we are doing a lot of business in Indonesia. Whenever I have a problem, they're going to solve it. They're going to solve it in a decent time window. That is my experience I have. It's even faster outside. And this is also my worries for Germany. We are standing here. We have the technology, that's right. But the framework is not really in an acceptable way from an industry perspective.
Mr. Goda, similar experience?
A different perspective from a good example. We have invested for a photovoltaic plant in Togo plant. 15 months passed. We just still wait the approval by the ministry just for connection. And the total size of this investment is significant, and it will reduce the also dependency and as well availability of electricity to other potential users. In general, in developing side or mature markets, what we see, the bureaucracy and red tape is clearly a point that is blocking now all these initiatives. Another example I would like to give is South Africa, very easy example also. For just one expat position, I'm still waiting 12 months for a visa. I mean, these are things that are creating such difficulties just to move the expertise, just to move the technology from one country to another. So all these are adding more level of, let's say, limitations specifically for developing countries.
Right. There will be time for a third and last question if there is.
May I not even react to that?
Oh, sure.
I think there was a question which was we did not really answer.
Yeah, so many reactions
on
here.
more capital.
Just because the
Yeah, but I think the answer I think is not. There's no one single answer to that, and I think that just show the discussion. I think it's always something in between. In between regulation, it's something in between how you can, as said earlier, how you can implement projects very swiftly and straightforward, and how it is a divide up of public money and private money. And I think, unfortunately, the world is so complicated that it all somehow needs to play out to really to attract more capital and get more capital. When it comes to what we can do on the official side, I think it is really worthwhile thinking what is in terms of how the instruments are set up and where you need what. Do you need a cover? Do you need a guarantee to cover political risk? Do you need a cover or guarantee which needs more than that? Do you need, like when it comes to green hydrogen, does it need incentives or does it need kind of support to get the project started to make them bankable? So I think we are, but I think there is more momentum now in that debate. I think we have to make ourselves more clear and have to shape instruments and financing products more precisely to depending on to which industry and which country. And I think for me the key how we get more capital get more capital and attract more capital for emerging markets in developing countries.
You like to relate and react on that?
No, actually, I'm very glad that Ms. Leibach has actually already mentioned how different instruments have to come together, that support instruments, but also the right regulatory framework. And what prompted my wish to react was, of course, Mr. Lauber's intervention, and we are actually working a lot on improving the framework conditions for renewable energies and for the energy transition, and have sped up procedures. We have actually adopted the largest legislative package for decades on expanding renewable energies. And you'll be happy to hear that we're also working on speeding up procedures for hydrogen at the moment.
Good news.
Mr. Fakir, last question from my side. There's so many engineers, economists here, and if it comes to justice and defining what is a just transition, I think we are all not lost, but at least need some assistance and some help with the experience of the last year and writing the investment plan. Did you find good criteria that could also apply to other JETPs then in the future, how we could measure what just really is?
So the Presidential Climate Commission in South Africa has a framework which has been consulted with business, labor, government and other parties. I think it's a useful framework. It sets out a set of principles, a useful guide. But I do think justice is a broader societal question of consciousness. For example, the challenge we'll have is that we have to try to build green with better social consciousness. We can't do like the the old model of not having some level of moral consciousness, not only at the level of companies but broadly in society. So it starts with that. It's not a technical engineering issue. It's a question of how you feel about other people and what you want to give them. I think that's important. We should start with that. I think Germany has many philosophers with great theories of ethics, like Kant and many others. So we should use that.
Broad theoretical concepts, in fact, and make it practical is what the JETPs should be all about. That was our panel, the role of private sectors in just energy transition partnerships, with the first role models, South Africa and other countries that we've already identified to follow. Thank you so much for joining us late in Sharm El-Sheikh. And well, let's see in a year how the other partners, the other partnerships will develop. At least I think we found out that these partnerships will maybe close the gap and make a difference to the already existing instruments. And that's why we're extremely interesting to show what industry can do, what private actors can do, but what the partnerships in total also can change in these countries. Thank you so much. Good night.